The Arab millionaire was choking at dinner, and no one understood his desperate cries for help, until a 7-year-old waitress's daughter calmly approached and spoke perfect Arabic, saving his life. Before we dive into the story, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. Omar al-Rashid had eaten in 5-star restaurants across 3 continents, but tonight he found himself in Martha's Diner, a modest little place on Route 66 in Cedar Falls, Arizona. The cracked vinyl booths and flickering neon sign weren't exactly his usual style, but his driver had recommended it after their Mercedes broke down just outside town. "Best apple pie this side of the Mississippi," the mechanic had promised with a gap-toothed grin. Omar loosened his Hermes tie and tried to blend in, though his custom Italian suit made that nearly impossible. At 32, he'd built a tech empire worth $300 million, but tonight he just wanted to be anonymous, another traveler passing through America's heartland. The waitress who approached his table looked exhausted. Her name tag read Maria, and despite her tired smile, Omar noticed the worry lines around her eyes. She couldn't have been older than 28, but life had clearly been harder on her than it had been on him. "What can I get you, hun?" she asked, refilling his water glass. Omar ordered the meatloaf special, and Maria hurried away to serve other customers. The diner was busier than he'd expected for a Tuesday night. Truckers, local families, a few teenagers sharing milkshakes. Simple people living simple lives. Halfway through his meal, it started. First came the tightness in his chest, then the burning sensation spreading up his throat. Omar dropped his fork, clutching his chest as his breathing became labored. The room began to spin, and he could hear his heart pounding in his ears. "Help!" he gasped, his accent becoming thick with panic. "Help me! Cannot breathe!" Maria rushed over, panic in her eyes. Sir, what's wrong?" Omar's English deteriorated as the anxiety attack intensified. His words became jumbled, mixing broken phrases with desperate gestures. "Medicine. Pocket. Please." He wheezed, pointing frantically at his jacket, but his heavy accent and distress made him nearly impossible to understand. The other diners gathered around, everyone talking at once, but no one comprehending his desperate pleas. Maria knelt beside his chair, her hands shaking as she tried to help, but Omar's panicked, broken English was meaningless to her. "Should I call 911? Someone shouted. "He's having some kind of attack. Can't understand what he's saying." Omar's vision blurred as he felt consciousness slipping away. His medication was right there in his jacket pocket, the pills that controlled his severe anxiety attacks, but he couldn't make anyone understand through his thick accent and panic. Then, through the chaos, came a small, clear voice. "He needs his medicine. It's in his pocket." Everyone turned to see a little girl with dark pigtails standing beside the table. She couldn't have been more than 7 years old, wearing a faded princess dress and carrying a coloring book. "Sir," she said gently, her voice calm and clear, "you're having a panic attack. Your medicine is in your jacket pocket, right? 2 pills under your tongue?" Omar's eyes widened as this child spoke to him with perfect understanding, somehow cutting through his panic and accent to comprehend what the adults couldn't. She reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the small pill bottle, reading the label with the confidence of someone far beyond her years. 2 pills under the tongue," she announced to the room, then gently helped Omar take his medication. "Just breathe slowly, in through your nose, out through your mouth. You're going to be okay." As his breathing slowly returned to normal, Omar stared at this impossible child who had just saved his life. She spoke to him with such clarity and understanding, as if she could see right through his panic to what he needed. "How did you know?" he whispered, his voice still shaky. Sophie smiled, a gap-toothed grin that reminded him of the mechanic. "My neighbor, Mr. Chen, has panic attacks sometimes. I've seen them before." Then she surprised everyone by switching effortlessly between languages. Languages help me understand people better. You speak beautiful English, but when you're scared, your accent gets stronger. That's normal. Before anyone could respond, she demonstrated her remarkable gift, counting to 10 in what sounded like Mandarin, then Italian, then French, translating each phrase back to English for the amazed crowd. "Sophie!" Maria rushed over, her face a mixture of relief and bewilderment. "Sweetheart, how did you know what to do?" "I listen to people, Mama," Sophie said simply. "Languages are like music. Everyone has their own rhythm." Omar looked from the remarkable child to her exhausted mother, pieces of a puzzle beginning to form in his mind. A 7-year-old linguistic genius in the middle of nowhere, a mother working herself to death in a small-town diner, and a child with more wisdom than most adults he knew. "Miss," he said to Maria, his voice still shaky but his English clear again, "we need to talk." 20 minutes later, the diner had emptied except for Omar, Maria and Sophie, who sat colouring at a nearby booth. Omar had insisted on paying for everyone's meals as a thank you, much to Maria's embarrassment and the delight of the other customers who'd witnessed the drama. "You really don't need to do that, mister." Maria trailed off, realizing she didn't know his name. "Al-Rashid, Omar Al-Rashid, and yes, I do need to do this." He leaned forward, his eyes serious. "Your daughter saved my life tonight. That medication. Without it, I could have gone into cardiac arrest from the panic attack." Maria glanced nervously at Sophie, who seemed absorbed in her colouring book, but was clearly listening to every word. The child had an uncanny ability to appear distracted while actually being hyper-aware of adult conversations, a skill Maria had noticed developing over the past few years. She's always been different. "Smart beyond her years," Maria said carefully, unconsciously lowering her voice. "Different doesn't begin to cover it." Omar kept his tone equally quiet. "I've traveled to 43 countries, Maria. I speak 5 languages myself, and I've done business with some of the most educated people in the world. I've never met anyone, adult or child, who could switch between languages like that, with such perfect pronunciation and cultural understanding. How long has she been able to do this?" Maria's hands twisted in her apron, a nervous habit she'd developed during her marriage to Sophie's father. "Since she was 4. Maybe earlier, but that's when I first really noticed. She just picks things up." She hesitated, glancing around the empty diner as if checking for eavesdroppers. "There's this old man, Mr. Chen, who lives in the trailer park where we stay. He's from China, been lonely since his wife died last year. Sophie started visiting him when she was 5, just being kind, like she is with everyone. Within weeks, she was speaking Mandarin like she'd been born to it." Omar's eyebrows rose. "Weeks? That's when I realized it wasn't normal. Then she met Mrs. Rodriguez at the grocery store, started speaking Spanish. The librarian, Mrs. Dubois, moved here from France 5 years ago. Sophie absorbed French from her in a month. It's like she's hungry for languages, hungry for connection." Omar studied the young mother more carefully. Her uniform was clean but worn, carefully mended in places. Her shoes had been resoled multiple times, and there was a bone-deep tiredness in her eyes that spoke of more than just one long shift. This was a woman carrying the weight of impossible choices. "Tell me about your situation, Maria. Your real situation. Please." From the booth behind them came Sophie's voice, small but eerily perceptive. "Mama works 3 jobs. Sometimes she cries when she thinks I'm sleeping because the bills come faster than the money." Maria's face crumpled, years of carefully maintained composure finally cracking. "Sophie, honey, it's okay, Mama. The nice man wants to help. I can tell by his voice patterns and the way he's sitting forward. He's genuinely concerned, not just curious." Omar felt something shift in his chest. a tightness that had nothing to do with his anxiety condition and everything to do with recognizing suffering he might be able to alleviate. 3 jobs? He asked gently. Maria nodded, unable to speak for a moment. Maria looked like she wanted to disappear into the cracked vinyl booth, but Omar's patient, non-judgmental expression encouraged her to continue. I work here 5 nights a week, from 6 p.m. to 2 a.m. Then I clean offices downtown 3 mornings a week, starting at 5 a.m. And weekends, I do laundry and cleaning for the Desert Rose Motel on the highway. Her voice was barely a whisper now. Sophie's father, David, left when she was 2, said he couldn't handle a baby, let alone one that was. She glanced at Sophie, choosing her words carefully. Special. He said having a kid who was smarter than him made him feel stupid, and he wasn't going to live feeling stupid every day. Mama thinks I don't remember him, Sophie said without looking up from her incredibly detailed coloring, a geometric pattern that would challenge most adults. But I do. He was scared of me. He used to get angry when I would repeat things he said in the same voice, or when I'd correct his grammar. I was only little, but I could tell words mattered to people. The simple statement hit Omar like a physical blow. A father, intimidated and threatened by his own brilliant daughter's gifts, instead of celebrating them. The thing is, Maria continued, her voice gaining strength as she talked about Sophie, she needs so much more than I can give her. She should be in advanced programs, working with language professors, maybe even attending university courses. But those programs cost money we don't have. The public school here barely has resources for regular kids, let alone. Gifted children, Omar finished. Genius children, Maria corrected quietly. Because that's what she is, isn't she? A genuine genius. And I'm holding her back with my 3 jobs and our tiny trailer and our barely making rent life. Every day, I watch her get a little more frustrated with the limited world I can provide. Omar watched Sophie carefully color inside the lines of what appeared to be a mandala pattern inspired by multiple cultural traditions. Definitely not something from a typical children's coloring book. As she worked, she hummed softly, and he realized she was humming folk melodies from different countries, switching between them as naturally as breathing, each tune perfectly authentic. Sophie, he called softly, where did you learn those songs? She looked up, her dark eyes bright with enthusiasm. Mrs. Dubois taught me the French one. It's about a nightingale. Mr. Chen shared the Chinese melody. It's about missing home. Mrs. Rodriguez taught me the Spanish lullaby her grandmother used to sing. Music and language are cousins, you know. They both carry feelings between people. The profound simplicity of the statement left Omar speechless. This child wasn't just linguistically gifted. She understood the deeper emotional and cultural purpose of communication itself. What does Sophie want to be when she grows up? He asked Maria. She says she wants to help people understand each other better, Maria replied, pride and sadness mixing in her voice. She says the world has too much confusion and conflict because people can't talk to each other properly, can't understand what others really mean. Sophie set down her crayon and looked directly at Omar. Languages are like bridges, she said with startling seriousness. They connect people who would otherwise be islands. But most people only know how to build one bridge, so they can only reach the islands closest to them. I want to build all the bridges. The profound wisdom from such a young voice left Omar momentarily stunned. Maria, Omar said carefully, what if I told you there might be a way to help Sophie reach her full potential without you having to sacrifice everything you've worked for? Maria's expression immediately became guarded. Years of disappointment having taught her to be wary of promises that seemed too good to be true. Mr. Al-Rashid, we appreciate your kindness tonight, we really do, but we can't accept charity. I work for what we have, and I teach Sophie that we earn our way in this world. What if it wasn't charity? Omar asked. What if it was a legitimate business investment in the most extraordinary linguistic talent I've ever encountered? He pulled out his phone, navigating to his company's profile and sliding it across the table to Maria. I own Al Rashid Technologies. We develop translation software, cultural communication platforms, and language learning applications used by governments and corporations worldwide. What Sophie can do naturally, understand not just words but cultural context, emotional subtext, and the deeper meaning behind communication. We spend millions of dollars trying to replicate artificially. Maria stared at the screen, her eyes widening as she scrolled through the company information, the client testimonials, the financial reports. You're really worth hundreds of millions of dollars, among other things. But right now, I'm a man who recognizes extraordinary potential when I see it. And more importantly, I'm someone who understands what it's like to have gifts that the world around you doesn't know how to nurture. Omar leaned forward earnestly. I want to offer Sophie a full scholarship to the Pemberton Academy in California. It's a school specifically designed for exceptionally gifted children, where she'd have access to language professors from top universities, cultural immersion programs, and advanced learning opportunities that would challenge her incredible mind. No. Maria's voice was sharp and immediate. Absolutely not. Sophie looked up from her coloring, confused and a little hurt. Mama, we're not sending you away, baby. We're a family. We stick together no matter what. Omar held up his hands peacefully. I'm not suggesting you send her away alone. The scholarship would include housing for both of you in California, plus a position for you at our company's West Coast office. You'd have full benefits, a real salary that would let you work one job instead of 3, and Sophie would get the education she deserves. Maria was quiet for a moment, and Omar could see the internal battle playing out across her face. Hope warring with skepticism, love for her daughter fighting with fear of the unknown. There's more, Omar continued gently. Sophie would also work part-time as a consultant for our translation and cultural communication projects, age-appropriate paid work that would let her use her gifts to help our clients communicate better across cultural barriers. She'd be helping people understand each other while earning money for her future education. Sophie set down her crayon completely now, her full attention on the conversation. You mean I could help people understand each other for real, not just here in our little town, but everywhere? All over the world, Sophie. Your gift could help millions of people communicate better, prevent misunderstandings that lead to conflicts, help families separated by language barriers connect with each other. Maria was studying Omar's face intently, searching for signs of deception or hidden motives. Why? Why would you do this for complete strangers? What do you really get out of it? Nah, Omar thought of his own childhood. Wealthy, beyond most people's dreams, but emotionally impoverished. Parents too busy building their empire to notice their son's panic attacks beginning at age 12. The isolation of being surrounded by people who wanted something from him rather than caring about who he actually was. Because everyone deserves a chance to reach their full potential, regardless of their circumstances. And because tonight, your daughter saved my life. Let me try to help save hers from being wasted in a system that can't recognize or nurture her extraordinary gifts. But as the words left his mouth, Omar noticed something that made his blood run cold. A black sedan with tinted windows had pulled up outside the diner, and 2 men in expensive suits were getting out, moving with the purposeful stride of people on a mission. His business rivals had found him. Mr. Al-Rashid? One of the men entered the diner, his smile cold and professionally threatening. He was tall, silver-haired, with the kind of expensive grooming that screamed corporate power. Marcus Webb, Senior Vice President of Acquisition for Titan Industries. We need to have a conversation. Omar's blood ran cold. Titan Industries was his biggest competitor, a massive corporation that had been trying to buy out his company for the past 8 months through increasingly aggressive tactics. The fact that they'd tracked him to this small Arizona town meant they were more desperate and more dangerous than he'd thought. Gentlemen, as you can see, I'm in the middle of a personal conversation about hiring a child as a consultant. Webb's smile turned predatory as he gestured towards Sophie. Interesting business practice. I wonder what the Department of Labor would think about that. Child labor laws are quite strict these days. Maria instinctively moved closer to Sophie, who had gone very quiet, but was watching the men with the intense observational skills Omar had already witnessed. He realized with growing horror that his generous offer might have just put this innocent family directly in the crosshairs of a corporate war they never asked to be part of. There's nothing illegal about educational opportunities and age-appropriate consulting work, Omar said carefully, trying to keep his voice level. Of course not, but there might be questions about a foreign national offering to relocate an American family across state lines for employment purposes. Immigration Services gets very nervous about that sort of thing, especially when it involves children. Webb's implied threat was crystal clear, and his companion, a younger man with cold eyes, was already taking photos of Sophie with his phone. Sophie suddenly stood up, walking over to the men with the fearless curiosity of a child who didn't yet understand that some adults were genuinely dangerous. "You're speaking English perfectly," she said, tilting her head with that characteristic analytical expression, "but your body language is saying something completely different." In Japan, they have a concept called tatemai, the difference between what you say in public and what you really mean. Webb looked down at her, clearly startled by her directness and sophistication. "Excuse me, little girl?" "Oh, you're trying to scare my friend Omar and my mama," Sophie continued with matter-of-fact precision. "But you're scared too. I can tell by how you're standing." Weight shifted back, ready to leave quickly. "Your voice gets higher when you talk about laws, which means you're not sure about what you're saying. And your friend keeps looking at the door like he's expecting someone else to come in." The second man stepped forward aggressively. "Kid, you should mind your own." In Arabic, Sophie switched languages smoothly, speaking directly to Omar. "There's a phrase, al-haqiqa tuzar fi al-ayn. The truth shows in the eyes." These men's eyes are worried because they know they're not supposed to be here. Webb's composed facade cracked slightly. "How does a child in the middle of nowhere—" "Sophie," Maria called urgently, fear making her voice sharp. "Come back here right now." But Sophie wasn't finished. She looked directly at Omar and spoke rapidly in what sounded like Mandarin, then Italian, then back to English. "I told you in 3 languages that these men came here too fast after you made your phone calls earlier. They were already watching you somehow, or listening to your conversations." Omar's eyes widened in understanding. His phone calls to arrange potential opportunities for Sophie. Someone had been monitoring his communications, tracking his movements. Webb stepped closer to Omar, dropping any pretense of civility. "We'll be in touch very soon, Al-Rashid, and we'll be keeping a very close eye on your new interests. Talented children can be so vulnerable to exploitation, don't you think?" As the men left, Omar realized that his simple desire to help had just made Maria and Sophie targets in a corporate war they never asked to be part of, and the stakes had just become much higher than money. After the men left, the diner felt smaller, more vulnerable, as if the walls themselves had been compromised. Maria clutched Sophie protectively, while Omar paced behind the counter, running his hands through his hair and cursing himself for his naivety. "I'm so sorry," he said, genuine anguish in his voice. "I never intended to put you in danger. I thought I was offering help, not painting a target on your backs." "Who were those men really?" Maria asked, her voice tight with the kind of fear that comes from being genuinely powerless. I mean, I know you said competitors, but what do they actually want? Omar sat down heavily, suddenly looking older than his 32 years. Titan Industries has been trying to destroy my company for months. They want to force a buyout because our translation technology is years ahead of theirs, and they're losing contracts to us every quarter. They've tried corporate espionage, legal harassment, even attempting to poach my key employees with ridiculous offers. He looked at Sophie, who was listening with an intensity that reminded him again how extraordinary her mind was. Now they see Sophie as either a weapon they can use against me, threatening her to force me to sell, or a potential asset they want to control for themselves. A child who can do naturally what costs us millions to approximate artificially. She's invaluable. Sophie tugged on her mother's sleeve, her expression more serious than any 7-year-old should be. Mama, remember what happened to Mr. Chen last month? When those men in suits came asking questions about his inventions, Maria's face went pale. What about Mr. Chen, baby? He had to move away suddenly. He told me that some companies don't like it when smart people won't work for them, so they make life difficult until those people have no choice. Sophie's voice was matter-of-fact, but there was a wisdom in her eyes that spoke of conversations with adults who tried to protect her innocence while preparing her for harsh realities. The implication hit Omar like a sledgehammer. This wasn't the first time Titan Industries had pressured potential assets in this small town. Sophie had already been on their radar. How many other people like Mr. Chen have you known? Omar asked gently. Sophie thought for a moment. 3 others. Mrs. Petrov was a scientist from Russia. She moved away after men came asking about her research. Dr. Kim was working on some kind of medical device from his garage. And there was a younger man, maybe college age, who was really good with computers. Omar's blood chilled further. Titan wasn't just targeting his company. They were systematically identifying and pressuring anyone with valuable intellectual property or unique talents in small communities where people were vulnerable and had few resources to fight back. We need to leave, Omar said urgently. Tonight. If they're willing to track me to a small-town diner and they've been monitoring this area for potential assets, they won't hesitate to escalate the pressure once I'm gone. Leave. Maria's voice cracked with the sound of a life being uprooted again. This is our home, our life. Sophie has friends here, people who care about her. I have 3 jobs. I can't just abandon everything because some corporate bullies made threats. Mama, Sophie interrupted, her voice unusually serious for a 7-year-old. Remember what you always tell me when I'm scared to try something new. Sometimes the bravest thing is knowing when to start over and trust that we're strong enough to build something better. Omar pulled out his phone, then hesitated. If Titan was monitoring his communications, every call he made could put them in more danger and give their pursuers more information to use against them. Sophie seemed to read his mind with that uncanny perceptiveness he was beginning to recognize as one of her most remarkable traits. Mr. Chen taught me something important before he left, she said quietly. He said when powerful people are listening, sometimes you have to speak in ways they don't understand and use connections they don't know about. She walked to the old payphone in the corner of the diner. Something Omar hadn't even noticed was still functional, and to his amazement began speaking rapid, fluent Mandarin to someone on the other end. The conversation lasted several minutes, with Sophie occasionally switching to what sounded like Korean and then back to Mandarin. When she hung up and returned to the table, her expression was calm but determined. My friend Li Wei's father runs a network for people who need to disappear quickly and safely. He says there's a place we can go tonight where we'll be protected while we figure out our next steps, but we have to decide right now. Omar stared at this remarkable child, who apparently had international connections he couldn't have imagined. Sophie, exactly how many people in this town do you really know? And how many of them have had to deal with situations like this before? Sophie's smile was mysterious and far too knowing for her years. More than you think, and most of them have been waiting for the right moment to help me leave this place safely. Some of us have been planning for this day longer than you might expect. Maria looked between her daughter and Omar, a dawning realization crossing her face. This isn't the first time someone's tried to exploit your gifts, is it, baby? Sophie shook her head solemnly. But it might be the first time we have a real chance to stay ahead of them and build something better. Outside, multiple sets of car headlights appeared in the distance, moving slowly but deliberately toward the diner. Decision time, Omar said grimly, but he was beginning to understand that Sophie had been preparing for this moment much longer than any of them had realized. The back door of Martha's diner opened silently, and a small Asian woman slipped inside. She moved with the quiet efficiency of someone accustomed to dangerous situations, her eyes immediately assessing exits and potential threats. "Sophie," she said softly in Mandarin, "it's time." Sophie hugged her coloring book and stood without hesitation. "Mama, this is Mrs. Lin. She helped Mr. Chen when he had to leave." Maria looked between the stranger and her daughter, reality sinking in. "You've been planning this for how long?" "Since I was 5, Sophie said simply. "Mrs. Lin taught me that smart people sometimes have to disappear before bad people can hurt them. She said I should always be ready." "Mrs." Lin spoke rapidly in Mandarin to Sophie, who nodded and translated for Omar and Maria. "She says Titan Industries has been systematically targeting exceptional individuals in small communities across the Southwest for 3 years. They identify people with valuable skills, then use pressure tactics to force compliance or drive them away if they refuse cooperation." Omar felt sick. "How many people?" 47 that we know of," Mrs. Lin said in accented but clear English. "Scientists, inventors, linguists, mathematicians, computer programmers, anyone whose talents could be monetized. Your Sophie has been on their watch list since she was 6. Maria's legs gave out, and she sank into a booth. 6 years old? She was just a baby. A baby who could already speak 4 languages fluently and was demonstrating pattern recognition abilities that surpassed most adults, Mrs. Lin continued gently. "We've been protecting her, preparing escape routes, building networks. Tonight became necessary sooner than we hoped." Sophie walked to her mother and took her hand. "It's okay, Mama. Mrs. Lin and her friends have helped lots of families. They have a safe place where we can figure out what to do next." Through the diner's front windows, Omar could see more headlights approaching, at least 3 vehicles this time. Mrs. Lin noticed immediately. "They're escalating. Everyone needs to move now." She led them toward the back exit, speaking into a small radio in rapid Korean. As they stepped into the alley behind the diner, Omar was amazed to see a small convoy waiting, 2 nondescript minivans and an old pickup truck, all with engines running and lights off. "Separation protocol," Mrs. Lin explained efficiently. "Omar, you go in the first van with Mr. Park, Maria and Sophie in the second van with Mrs. Gonzalez. If one vehicle is caught, the others can escape." "No," Maria said firmly, clutching Sophie. "We stay together." Sophie squeezed her mother's hand. "Mrs. Lin is right, Mama. If something goes wrong, you need to be safe so you can find me later. I'll be okay for a little while." The wisdom and courage in such a young voice broke Omar's heart, even as it amazed him. As they prepared to separate, Sophie pulled a small notebook from her pocket and handed it to Omar. "If we get separated, this has ways to contact people who can help. But be careful, some of the contacts are in code." Omar flipped through pages covered in what appeared to be children's drawings, but looking closer, realized were actually sophisticated maps, contact information in multiple languages, and what looked like communication protocols. "Sophie," he whispered, What are you? She smiled, still a 7-year-old's gap-toothed grin, but with eyes that had seen too much. Someone who's been getting ready for tonight her whole life. The sound of car doors slamming in front of the diner ended their conversation. 2 hours later, Omar found himself in what appeared to be an ordinary suburban home in Flagstaff, Arizona. But as Mrs. Gonzalez led him through the house, he realized it was anything but ordinary. Hidden behind bookcases were computer terminals monitoring dozens of communication channels. The basement had been converted into a high-tech communications center that would have impressed his own company's IT department. "Welcome to Station 7, said a familiar voice behind him. Omar turned to see Mr. Chen, the elderly Chinese man Sophie had mentioned. But this wasn't a frail retiree living in a trailer park. This was a man with sharp, intelligent eyes and the bearing of someone accustomed to command. Dr. Chen Liwei, formerly of MIT's Artificial Intelligence Laboratory, the man introduced himself formally. Though in Cedar Falls, I was just the lonely old man who befriended a remarkable little girl. Omar's mind reeled. You're Dr. Chen? The quantum computing pioneer who disappeared 5 years ago? Disappeared is relative. I relocated when certain corporations became too interested in my work, but I've been far from idle. Dr. Chen gestured around the sophisticated setup. We've built a network to protect and evacuate exceptional individuals who find themselves targeted by corporate predators. Dr. Chen smiled. Mrs. Lin holds 3 PhDs in linguistics and was a translator for the United Nations before Titan forced her into hiding. Mrs. Gonzalez is a former FBI cybersecurity specialist. Mr. Park was a surgeon in Seoul before pharmaceutical companies tried to steal his medical innovations. Omar sank into a chair, overwhelmed. You're all geniuses in hiding, Dr. Chen finished, forced underground by the same systematic exploitation that now threatens Sophie. But we've learned to turn our skills toward protecting others like us. A secure phone rang, and Dr. Chen answered with obvious concern. After a brief conversation in Mandarin, he hung up with a grim expression. Complication. Titan Industries has filed emergency custody papers claiming Sophie is being trafficked across state lines by her mother and a foreign national, you, Omar. They have a court order and are working with local police. Omar's blood turned to ice. They can and they are, Anne. Titan has lawyers, money, and government connections. They're using the legal system as a weapon. Dr. Chen paused. There's more. They've identified the location where Maria and Sophie are hiding. Our people are moving them, but it's going to be close. Where are they taking her? Dr. Chen hesitated. Somewhere even we might not be able to reach her if they succeed. Omar, there's something about Sophie you need to understand, something we've discovered over the past 2 years of watching and protecting her. What? Her abilities aren't just exceptional, they're unprecedented. In the history of documented linguistics, no one has ever demonstrated her combination of rapid language acquisition, cultural intuition, and communication analysis. She doesn't just learn languages. She understands the deep structural patterns that connect all human communication. Omar felt a chill of premonition. You're saying she's unique? I'm saying she might be the most linguistically gifted human being who has ever lived. And Titan Industries isn't just trying to exploit her talents. They're trying to study her brain, to reverse engineer her abilities for artificial intelligence applications. The room fell silent as the full horror of the situation became clear. They don't just want to hire her, Omar whispered. They want to dissect her mind. Dr. Chen nodded grimly. And they're willing to destroy anyone who tries to stop them. The call came at 3 a.m. Omar jerked awake in the safe house guest room to find Dr. Chen standing over him, the man's face pale with urgency. They have Maria. Omar bolted upright. What? How? Legal kidnapping. Titan's lawyers convinced a judge that Maria was an unfit mother, endangering her child by fleeing with a foreign national. They executed the custody order 2 hours ago. Maria is being held pending a competency hearing. And Sophie... Dr. Chen's voice cracked slightly. Sophie is missing. Missing how? During the chaos of separating her from Maria, she slipped away from our protection team. A 7-year-old girl vanished into the Arizona desert in the middle of the night, and we have no idea where she is. Omar was pulling on his clothes before Dr. Chen finished talking. What aren't you telling me? Dr. Chen hesitated. This isn't the first time Sophie has disappeared when cornered. Last year, when social services investigated her educational neglect because she wasn't in traditional school, she vanished for 3 days. We found her eventually, but she'd somehow made contact with a network of people we'd never heard of. Street kids, runaways, underground communities. She has survival skills that... He shook his head. That no 7-year-old should possess. You think she's been preparing for this her entire life? I think Sophie has been preparing for things we can't even imagine. Downstairs in the communication center, the team was in crisis mode. Multiple screens showed tracking data, news feeds, and intercepted communications. Mrs. Lin was coordinating with contacts across 3 states, while Mrs. Gonzalez monitored police frequencies. Update, Doctor, Chen demanded. Mrs. Gonzalez looked up from her computers. Titan has mobilized a massive search operation. They're calling it a missing child recovery effort, but they've got professional tracking teams, heat-sensing drones, and corporate security forces that look more like military units. They're not just looking for her, Mrs. Lin added grimly. They're systematically shutting down every safe house and contact in our network. Somehow they knew exactly where to hit. We've lost communication with stations in Nevada, Utah, and New Mexico. Omar felt the walls closing in. They had inside information. Or, Dr. Chen said quietly, Sophie led them to us deliberately. Everyone in the room turned to stare at him. What are you saying? Omar demanded. I'm saying that for 2 years we've been protecting a child who might be more strategically sophisticated than all of us combined. What if Sophie didn't disappear by accident? What if she's been planning something none of us anticipated? Mrs. Lin's secure phone buzzed with an encrypted message. She read it and went pale. What? Dr. Chen asked. Message from an unknown sender, but using Sophie's personal code phrases. Mrs. Lin read from the screen, The bridges are burning, but I'm building new ones. Don't look for me where they expect. Look where language began. The desert remembers everything. It's signed, Your Smallest Diplomat. Omar stared at the cryptic message. Where language began. Dr. Chen was already moving toward a wall map of Arizona. There's an ancient Native American site about 40 miles northeast of here. Archaeological evidence suggests it was used for intertribal communication and translation for over 1,000 years. Different tribes would meet there to negotiate, trade, and... He paused, understanding dawning in his eyes. And what? And teach their children to speak to strangers. Outside, the distant sound of helicopters grew steadily louder. The helicopter searchlights swept across the desert like mechanical lightning, but Dr. Chen's modified SUV was running dark, its engine muffled and heat signature masked by technology that definitely wasn't standard automotive equipment. Satellite imagery shows massive activity around the archaeological site, Mrs. Gonzalez reported from her mobile command setup in the back seat. Titan has 3 teams converging on the location, plus aerial support. Omar gripped the dashboard as they navigated by night vision toward the ancient communication site. If Sophie's really there, she's walking into a trap. Or, Dr. Chen said grimly, she's setting one. They crested a ridge and saw the site below, a natural amphitheater of red rock formations that had sheltered human gatherings for millennia. But tonight it was lit up like a military operation. Corporate security teams with tactical gear were surrounding the area, while helicopters circled overhead. At the center of it all, barely visible in the harsh, artificial light, was a small figure sitting calmly on an ancient stone platform. Sophie. My God, Omar breathed. She's just sitting there. Doctor. Chen pulled out high-powered binoculars and focused on the scene below. She's not alone. Omar grabbed the binoculars and adjusted the focus. Around Sophie, barely visible in the shadows beyond the security lights, were dozens of people. Men, women, children, all sitting in concentric circles around the ancient platform. As his eyes adjusted, he realized with shock that he recognized some of them. That's Mrs. Rodriguez from the grocery store, and the librarian, Mrs. Dubois. But who are all the others? Dr. Chen was staring at the scene with growing amazement. I think we're looking at everyone Sophie has ever taught, learned from, or helped. But that's impossible. There have to be 100 people down there. Mrs. Gonzalez's equipment was picking up radio chatter from the Titan teams. They're confused. The security teams can't figure out what they're dealing with. They came expecting to capture one child, and instead they found what looks like some kind of gathering. Through the binoculars, Omar watched as Marcus Webb himself strode into the circle of light, flanked by armed security personnel. Even from a distance, Omar could see the man's confusion and growing anger. Then Sophie stood up on the ancient stone platform and began to speak. Her voice carried impossibly well in the desert air, amplified by the natural acoustics of the rock formation. But she wasn't speaking English. She was speaking in what sounded like multiple languages simultaneously, phrases in Spanish, flowing into Mandarin, flowing into Arabic, flowing into languages Omar didn't even recognize. And amazingly, the people around her were responding. Each person seemed to understand her perfectly, regardless of what language she was using at any given moment. She's not just translating, Dr. Chen whispered in wonder. She's creating a universal communication. She's found a way to speak to everyone at once in their own language while maintaining a single, coherent message. Webb was shouting commands, but his security team seemed paralyzed. They had trained for capturing fugitives, not for confronting what appeared to be some kind of international diplomatic gathering in the middle of the Arizona desert. Then Sophie did something that made Omar's blood freeze. She looked directly up at their hiding spot on the ridge and waved. She knows we're here, Mrs. Gonzalez said unnecessarily. She's known we were coming all along, Dr. Chen replied. The question is, what has she planned for us to see? Sophie spoke again, and this time her voice somehow reached them clearly across the distance. She was speaking in perfect English now, her words carrying an authority that seemed impossible from someone so young. Mr. Webb, she called out, you came here to capture me because you think I'm valuable, but you don't understand what makes me valuable or why so many people are willing to protect me. Webb stepped closer to the platform, his confusion evident even from their distant vantage point. Sophie Martinez, by order of the court. My name, Sophie interrupted, her young voice somehow commanding the attention of everyone present, is not Sophie Martinez. The words hung in the desert air like a physical presence. My name is Sophia Lynn Rodriguez Chen Dubois Martinez. I am the daughter of everyone who taught me, the student of everyone who learned from me, and the bridge between everyone who couldn't understand each other before I helped them. Omar felt the world shift around him as understanding dawned. She's not just a gifted child, he whispered. She's the center of an entire community. Every person down there isn't just protecting her. They're protecting the connections she created between them. Dr. Chen nodded slowly. And now, Titan Industries is about to discover what happens when you threaten the heart of a network they never knew existed. Sophie's voice carried across the desert with impossible clarity, each word precisely enunciated despite her youth. Mr. Webb, you've spent 2 years tracking exceptional individuals across the Southwest, forcing them from their homes, stealing their work, and breaking up communities. Tonight you're going to learn why that was a mistake. Webb stepped forward aggressively, his corporate authority finally overriding his confusion. Sophie Martinez, you're coming with us. Your mother has been declared an unfit parent, and you're now a ward of the state pending placement in an appropriate educational facility. Educational facility? Sophie's laugh was both childlike and somehow ancient. Mr. Webb, I've been educated by 100 teachers in a dozen languages. I've learned quantum physics from Dr. Chen, cultural anthropology from Mrs. Lin, medical emergency procedures from Dr. Park, cybersecurity from Mrs. Gonzalez, and the deepest truths about human connection from every person sitting in this circle. She gestured to the people surrounding her, and Omar realized with growing amazement that more were still arriving. Figures emerged from the desert darkness, some on foot, some in vehicles with their lights off, all moving with the quiet purpose of people answering a long-planned summons. You see, Sophie continued, when you force exceptional people out of their communities, you don't make them disappear, you make them find each other. And when they find each other, they do something you never expected. What's that, little girl? Webb's voice dripped with condescension. They teach their children. Dr. Chen grabbed Omar's arm. Look at the people around her. Really look. Omar focused the binoculars more carefully. Among the adults in the circle were dozens of children, teenagers, pre-teens, and even some as young as Sophie, and as he watched, he realized they were all demonstrating abilities that defied explanation. One teenage boy was simultaneously translating Sophie's words into sign language, Morse code, and what appeared to be mathematical equations. A girl who couldn't have been more than 10 was drawing complex technical diagrams in the sand, while maintaining perfect eye contact with the security teams. It's not just Sophie, Omar breathed. She's part of a whole generation of gifted children who've been hidden and protected by this network. Mrs. Gonzalez's radio crackled with frantic communications from the Titan security teams. They're requesting immediate backup. They're saying the situation is beyond current operational parameters. Webb was shouting into his own radio, his corporate composure finally cracking. I don't care what it looks like. One small girl cannot possibly... His words were cut off as every child in the circle stood up simultaneously and began to speak. But they weren't speaking in English or Spanish or any single language. They were creating a chorus of communication that somehow transcended individual languages entirely, a form of expression that conveyed meaning directly from mind to mind. And impossibly, Omar found that he understood them perfectly. They were telling the story of every person who had been forced from their home, every family separated by corporate greed, every brilliant mind driven underground by systematic exploitation. They were weaving together the voices of refugees, immigrants, displaced scientists, persecuted inventors, and gifted children into a single narrative of human resilience and connection. They're not just speaking, Dr. Chen whispered in wonder. They're creating a new form of communication in real time, a language of pure meaning that transcends traditional linguistic barriers. Webb's security teams were backing away from the circle, their weapons useless against an opponent they couldn't understand or categorize. Even the helicopters overhead seemed to hesitate, their searchlights wavering as if uncertain what they were illuminating. Sophie stepped down from the ancient platform and walked directly toward Webb, her small figure somehow commanding attention from everyone present. You wanted to study my brain, Mr. Webb. You wanted to understand how I learn languages so quickly." She stopped just a few feet from the corporate executive, looking up at him with eyes that held no fear. "The secret isn't in my brain, it's in my heart." "What are you talking about?" "Every language I've learned, I learned because I loved the person who taught it to me. Every connection I've made, I made because I cared about understanding what someone else needed to say. You can't steal that, Mr. Webb. You can't corporatize love." Webb stepped forward menacingly. "Enough philosophy, little girl. You're coming with us, and these people are going to disperse immediately, or we'll have them all arrested for interfering with a legal custody order." Sophie smiled. The same gap-toothed, innocent smile Omar had first seen in Martha's diner. But now he understood it differently. It wasn't the smile of a child, it was the smile of someone who had been waiting her entire short life for this exact moment. "Mr. Webb," she said softly, "you should probably answer your phone." Webb's satellite phone began ringing. The sound echoed across the desert silence like a death knell for everything Titan Industries thought they knew about power, control, and the true nature of human connection. Webb's hand trembled as he answered the satellite phone, his corporate composure finally cracking under the pressure of the impossible situation surrounding him. "Webb here," he barked into the device. The voice that emerged from the speaker was crisp, authoritative, and utterly damning. "Mr. Webb, this is Director Sarah Chen of the FBI's Corporate Crimes Division. You and your teams need to stand down immediately." Webb's face went pale in the harsh artificial light. "Director Chen, I don't know what you think you're seeing, but we have legal authority. What I'm seeing, Mr. Webb, is a live international broadcast that has been watched by over 50 million people in the last hour." Director Chen's voice cut through his protests like a blade. "The entire world is watching your corporate security teams threaten a 7-year-old girl and a gathering of peaceful families." Omar grabbed Dr. Chen's arm as understanding dawned. "She planned this. Sophie planned all of this." Through the binoculars, Omar could see Webb frantically gesturing to his teams while continuing his phone conversation. But it was Director Chen's next words that made everything clear. "Mr. Webb, at 11:47 p.m. tonight, we received a comprehensive data package containing evidence of Titan Industries' systematic harassment, illegal surveillance, and corporate espionage targeting exceptional individuals across 17 states. The package included recorded conversations, financial records, and documentation of forced relocations dating back 3 years. Sophie stepped closer to Webb, her young voice carrying clearly across the desert air. "The package also included detailed evidence of your attempts to illegally gain custody of children for corporate exploitation, Mr. Webb. My friends around the world have been very busy tonight." Webb spun to stare at the child who had somehow orchestrated his downfall. "You're 7 years old. How could you possibly—" "I'm 7 years old, and I have friends in 63 countries who speak 47 languages between them," Sophie replied calmly. "Some of them are very good with computers. Others work for news organizations, governments, and international human rights agencies. When you threaten one of us, you threaten all of us." Director Chen's voice continued through the phone, now loud enough for everyone in the immediate area to hear. "Mr. Webb, as of 1 hour ago, Titan Industries' assets have been frozen pending a federal investigation. Your board of directors has voted to terminate your employment and cooperate fully with authorities. And frankly, sir, you're under arrest." The FBI vehicles materialized from the desert darkness, their lights finally illuminating the true scope of what Webb had stumbled into. What he had thought was a simple child recovery operation had become an international incident, and he was standing at the center of it, with the world watching. But it was what happened next that truly took Omar's breath away. Sophie raised her hand, and every person in the gathering, adults and children alike, began to speak in unison. But they weren't speaking to Webb or the FBI agents or even to each other. They were speaking to the cameras that Omar now realized had been hidden throughout the ancient site, broadcasting their message to the 50 million people watching around the world. "My name is Sofia Lynn Rodriguez Chen Dubois Martinez," they said in dozens of languages simultaneously, the words somehow harmonizing despite their linguistic diversity. "I am 7 years old, and I represent every child whose potential has been stolen, every family that has been broken apart by greed, and every brilliant mind that has been forced into hiding." The effect was mesmerizing. Each person spoke in their native language, but somehow the collective message was perfectly clear to anyone listening, regardless of their linguistic background. They were creating communication that transcended traditional barriers, speaking directly to the human heart in a way that needed no translation. "We are the bridges between worlds," the collective voice continued. "We are the children of refugees who learned new languages to survive. The immigrants who carry multiple cultures in their hearts, the scientists who speak the universal language of discovery, and the teachers who help others find their voices." Omar felt tears streaming down his face as he finally understood the true scope of what Sophie had built. This wasn't just a network of gifted individuals hiding from corporate exploitation. This was a new kind of human community, one that transcended nationality, language, and traditional boundaries. "You cannot buy us, threaten us, or silence us," the voices continued, "because we are not separate people you can target individually. We are the future of human connection itself." FBI agents were handcuffing Webb and his security team, but Omar barely noticed. He was transfixed by the sight of Maria suddenly appearing at the edge of the gathering, released from custody and running toward her daughter with tears of joy and relief. Sophie broke away from the collective and ran to her mother, finally becoming simply a 7-year-old child again as she threw herself into Maria's arms. "Mama, you're safe!" "Oh, baby," Maria sobbed, holding her daughter tight. "I was so scared. I thought I'd lost you forever." "You can't lose me, Mama. I'm connected to too many people now. We look out for each other." Dr. Chen appeared at Omar's shoulder as they watched the reunion. "So, my friend, what will you do now? Your corporate problems are solved, but I suspect your life has been changed in ways you never expected." Omar lowered the binoculars and looked around at the extraordinary scene unfolding below. The ancient communication site was now filled with families reuniting, international media crews documenting the story, and FBI agents taking testimony from people who had been hiding in fear for years. "I think," Omar said slowly, "I'm going to offer my company's resources to help Sophie and her network build something the world has never seen before." "Which is?" Omar smiled, thinking of a 7-year-old girl who had just demonstrated that love and connection were more powerful than any corporate empire. A way for every person on Earth to truly understand every other person, not just their words, but their hearts. As dawn broke over the Arizona desert, Sophie stood on the ancient platform once more, but this time she wasn't alone. She was surrounded by her extended family, Maria, Omar, Dr. Chen, and dozens of others who had found each other through her gift for building bridges between isolated souls. The world was watching, and for the first time in her short life, Sophie wasn't hiding her light. She was illuminating the path toward a future where no brilliant mind would ever have to hide again, and where the barriers between human hearts could finally be crossed by children brave enough to build bridges made of understanding, compassion, and love. "This is just the beginning," she whispered to Omar in perfect Arabic, then translated for everyone to hear. "The best stories always are.